Just a couple of housekeeping items. We're about to start. Bring our presenters out. Just a reminder that this is a media briefing only, credentialed media only, and members of the Amistad Project or our guests. Anyone not in that category, would ask you to kindly depart. But otherwise, we're glad you're here for this very important story we're going to tell today. Also, we are observing the proper social distancing rules, so please keep masks on as you are standing and walking, and keep distance, please, as we will do the same. Thanks again for being here, and we're about to begin now.
My name is Phil Klein. I'm the director of the Amistad Project of the Thomas More Society. And I appreciate your attendance and I look forward to your questions today. First, let me give a little preface as to what the Amistad Project and the Thomas More Society has been involved in over the last several months. The Amistad Project started looking into election integrity about 18 months ago. Through that process, we have developed attorneys that are in virtually every swing state that are working on our behalf. And additionally, we have investigators that have been involved in the field for several months, developing evidence as it relates to the integrity of the 2020 election. That effort has brought us to this day. Now, it is often extraordinarily difficult after an election in the short time frame to develop substantive evidence of an effort to violate election laws and to influence the election in an improper way. And that is why we have engaged in this investigation for some time and conducted the investigation in a manner that is a little bit different than what you might assume. And I will explain that. Today, the Amistad Project of the Thomas More Society, in cooperation with several whistleblowers, is releasing evidence of intentional fraudulent conduct to improperly influence the 2020 election. This evidence includes eyewitness accounts, eyewitness corroboration, and the review and assessment of tangible evidence, which supports and corroborates the statements of witnesses. Moreover, there are institutions and persons available to you who hold within their possession or within their knowledge, who can easily decide to be forthcoming and confirm the sworn statements of these whistleblowers and the other evidence which we are releasing today. Many of the people who can answer these questions thus far have refused access to the information. They have refused access to data or to share personal experiences. Refusal in such instances is done for a reason. People engage in conduct for a reason. People refuse to speak and decide to not be forthcoming. They do it for a reason. Generally, this refusal comes down to one or two reasons or a mixture of both. They are afraid, or they have done something or participated in something which they do not want others to know about. You will hear evidence detailing how 130,000 to 280,000 completed ballots which persons or a machine completed, put in the envelope, placed return addresses on, and then those ballots, 130,000 to 280,000, were transported from Bethpage, New York, into Lancaster, Pennsylvania, where they disappeared on October 21st of this year. Let me restate that again. This evidence demonstrates, and it's through eyewitness testimony that's been corroborated by others through their eyewitness statements that 130,000 to 280,000 completed ballots for the 2020 general election were shipped from Bethpage, New York to Lancaster, Pennsylvania, where those ballots and the trailer in which they were shipped disappeared. Also, the evidence that we have obtained indicates that on several occasions, completed ballots were shipped from a postal facility in Bethpage, New York, a postal facility that has no mail processing role in the United States Postal Service, a postal service facility that has no ability to receive incoming mail because it does not have the machines to process that mail, a postal service facility which, from persons that we've spoken with, has no basis to have completed ballots on its premises. This evidence demands investigation. This evidence demands answers. The American people deserve such answers. We have and we are in the process of sharing this information with law enforcement. We have been contacted and we have communicated with offices for Colonel Tony also and to Colonel you first. Ethan P. for the a story that occurred. He arrived at a postal. Madison?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Madison, Wisconsin. 2 separate days was informed on November 4th. Tens of thousands counted by postal to Gregory Stenstrom. He also in that process, and he will describe this recently. Access. You mentioned that people deny access for a reason, and denying access is a violation of law. An election in American history. The dimpled chads and debate. And that, for the first time in our nation's history, America was kicked out. Why? Indicate the why of the official violated all of the rules and cast serious doubt. Observations have been mirrored. Mr. Jesse Payne, my immediate right, a truck for a subcontractor of the United States Postal Service. You his story here in a moment, but I want to that story to tell you that the election that he knows tell you the burden Jesse. Let me back up. I'm sorry, Peter. Words. You know, investigate. I was a district. Will allow me. I'm going to observations. Redundant to your knowledge, but starts every investigation starts, and so when you begin in the right question to get answers for those questions, you to participate in the right question. You will have are questions we have the answer. Video footage, such as sign-in sheet here, there, positioning, postal service or haul their mail. Questions, and I would invite you. I've never who did not want me to that prove their, and I've never need to see the evidence that begins with the knowledge that something in the road. Somebody. Real investigation is if there's not an immediate threat to the to arrest. And it will lead up to Jesse Moore. I'm sorry, Jesse. Thank you. Why? Right over here. File this. Keep it. Yeah, you bringing it up? Several charts, in fact. That's okay, buddy. It's okay. This is our experts' analysis called into question by or sidestepped state is the first type. And let me from government. We hired some mathematicians to help crunch out, and they swore vote, whether they requested a ballot, votes counted in one. Here is of Republican ballots that state records show were not. This is in Georgia, 138,000 out-of-state persons voting, 20 double votes, 309 question, 204,000 for each of the 5 states that we have be provided to you. So how did this occur? How did it happen that these many ballots are called into question in this investigation? This is the blood in the street, so to speak. This is the evidence that something wrong occurred. Maybe not a crime. Maybe people were negligent. Maybe people did a poor job. But it certainly introduces questions that we must answer. And so we start to back up. And what we see in each one of these swing states is something else that hasn't happened before. It's the consolidation of counting centers, a dramatic consolidation in the urban core of the counting centers. Now, that was done, and the explanation was COVID, that it was necessary because of COVID. I will accept that at face value, except to state it doesn't make any sense to create a crowd to help protect against COVID. But nonetheless, they brought those persons together. Now, let's take a look at what happened in the counting centers, because there are also 2 other effects, even assuming that the proper purpose was COVID. What else happened in the counting centers? Well, I'll just take a couple of examples for you, and I'm sorry, again, I'm being redundant. You have heard this before, but it's important to understand it in the context of the story. In Michigan, I call it, what is the center called? TCF Center? The TCF Center in Michigan, the former hockey arena that they consolidated in Wayne County for the count. There were 134 counting or tables set up for each of those wards. Around them were inspectors. Those inspectors had the responsibility to take all ballots that they claimed couldn't run through the machine, and then set those ballots down, including all military ballots because of the paper that it's on, look at those ballots, and then say this person meant to vote for Biden or for Trump, and fill out pristine new ballots. These ballots would then separated, and they would cast ballots for persons who weren't there, completing ballots of third parties who weren't there. The law allows that, by the way, because you want to be efficient in counting the ballot. But the law also says the 2 major parties must be at that table. They must be able to see what happened and then sign off that it was done validly. That's a way of putting America in the counting room. Both major political parties watching what happens. That's fair. That's transparent elections. In Wayne County, it didn't happen. What they argued is that there was a Republican in the place. They put him in the penalty box, and they couldn't see what was happening at the table. So whether you think that's nefarious or not, that's one of the results of the consolidation of the counting centers, is that they removed what the law required, and you had partisans completing these ballots without oversight from America or the other political party as the law requires. So people violate the law for a reason. What is the reason that they violated that law? Additionally, I can tell stories in Philadelphia. I can tell stories in Fulton County, Georgia. I can tell stories in Phoenix, Arizona. But you hear those stories. You know those affidavits. You know that that happened. There are serious questions that result from it. Additionally, consolidating the counting facilities in conjunction with drop boxes, with the introduction of drop boxes. By the way, most of these drop boxes were paid for by Mark Zuckerberg's contribution to a group called the Center for Tech and Civic Life, and more on that a little bit later. Drop boxes hold anywhere from 4,000 votes or absentee ballots to up to 75,000 absentee ballots. This breached the chain of custody of the ballot in a significant way, unless these officials also, thank you, there's a drop box right here. And you might recall, as it relates to drop boxes, we were promised 24/7 security. We were promised videos to watch the drop boxes. By the way, has anybody seen the videos? that these election officials for every drop box that was out there? We were promised that there would be integrity in the flow and chain of custody of these ballots. That means they must have logs of who had keys to the drop boxes. That means legitimately they have to have a two-person per key system so that there's not one partisan who might pick up those ballots in a heavily Republican area and lose them on the way to the counting center, or vice versa, pick up ballots in a heavily Democrat area and lose them on the way to the counting center. Did they have two-person, one key? Do they have the logs of when these drop boxes were picked up? Will they ever release video of these drop boxes as they promised? So far, we have demanded such information. It has been refused. People refuse for a reason. What is that reason? We have election experts that have been working with us who say that conduct in breaking the chain of custody prevents the certification of the election process as applied under federal law, the Help America Vote Act. And we will have their testimony moving forward in numerous cases that the way that they did this election was not consistent with federal law in every one of these urban areas in every swing state. And the question is, why? Why not follow the law? So we've started moving backwards. And as we move backwards to understand exactly what happened in these counting centers and recognize that all of these drop boxes and the consolidation of the counting centers allowed for and justified the delivery of tens of thousands of ballots, hundreds of thousands of ballots late in the election in one location with one truck or two trucks delivering in an area that is away from any partisan observers, we began to have more questions. You see, if you're going to infuse a lot of fraudulent ballots into a system with a machine counting system, you've got a couple of things you have to take care of. First of all, I see some of you with your computers. And I remember my first computer was about this big, and it was less powerful than my watch. But now these things do amazing things. And they also count our ballots. But you can't see how they are counting them. You can't see in that machine. No one can, unless you're able to have access and print off logs which show how that machine has been operating. We have demanded the logs. There are certain types of logs that talk about the access the machine records. Any other access, it records all it's doing. No one has produced logs. No one. Why? In fact, it is our belief that in some of these areas, the state contract actually allows the logs to be the proprietary property of the vendor. If that is the case, we have signed away our right to see how the machines are operating. That in and of itself should be a national controversy. But let me move on a little bit further as it relates to the machines. Gregory Stenstrom saw behavior in Delaware County, and there are affidavits elsewhere, that show intentional conduct that are a breach in election procedures and actually collectively. I'm not saying they did. It is a good question for them. Actually would allow the alteration of the count, but most certainly breaks the chain of custody from critical jump drives or V-chips to the machines, to the precinct, to the ballot. That makes auditing extraordinarily difficult. Intentional conduct that makes auditing the performance of those machines to the integrity of the count extraordinarily difficult. So right now I'd like to have Mr. Stenstrom come up and share with you what he experienced in Delaware County.
Thank you, Phil. I was a Republican poll watcher and observer in Delaware County, Pennsylvania. As I previously testified before a special committee of the Pennsylvania legislature in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania last Wednesday. I'm a citizen, a former commanding and executive officer in the Navy, a veteran of foreign wars, a data scientist, and an expert in security and fraud. I witnessed irregularities at 7 polls in 22 precincts on Election Day, primarily poll workers providing voters regular ballots instead of provisional ballots, when records indicated that those voters had requested mail-in ballots. But what I observed at the centralized Delaware County vote counting center when I arrived there at 6 p.m. and then over the next 3 days was a forensically destructive process that involved mail-in ballots, Dropbox ballots, and electronic USB V-card vote uploads. Despite possessing valid credentials, it was a 5-hour battle just to gain entry to the main counting room. And it would be another 3 days before I could secure a court order to observe the sequestered back rooms for 5 minutes for every 2 hours to observe ballots and how they were ingested. When I was finally allowed inside, I saw many boxes of 500 ballots each being carried in and out of the sequestered back room. The election officials in charge of operations refused to let me or other credential observers inside the room, even though we had every right to enter, and objected. There were disturbing breaches of protocol taking place in plain sight. At one point, I saw unsecured USB V-card drives from voting machines being separated from their accompanying cartridges and paper tapes and commingled together by election workers. These actions destroyed any forensic auditability and corrupted the chain of custody. Formal objections to election officials and law enforcement officers that were present went unanswered. Later, I saw the voting machine warehouse supervisor for Delaware County carrying in unsealed bags of unsecured USB V-card drives, which he inexplicably proceeded to plug into computers, the vote counting computers, and upload into the official vote tally. Despite formal objections to senior law enforcement that was present and election board officials, he was allowed to continue. When he was finished, the vote count shot up by 50,000 votes for Vice President Biden. 47 USB cards were missing at the end of last week. As of today, that number has reportedly grown to 64. When I finally gained access to the sequestered room, this is the 3 days later, where mail-in ballots were ingested, I witnessed 60 to 70,000 unopened mail-in ballots in sequestered back offices. That was on Thursday at 3:30, after the vote was supposedly counted. They remain unaccounted for. We don't know where they are. All signed paper chain of custody documents are missing, despite attempts by Democrat election officials to recreate them. My questions then and now remain: where did the ballots come from? Where did these mail-in ballots come from? And where did they go? Thank you for your time. Phil, appreciate being here.
And there's another question. Why? Why engage in conduct that you know destroys the chain of custody of this important material in a vital election, unless there is an objective? People don't violate the law intentionally unless they have a reason. What could be the reason? And so we started to explore backwards again. I'm taking you backwards. How would you use that destruction of evidence, and why would it be necessary to destroy this evidence to engage in this conduct? Well, you have to understand what evidence is within the machine. What evidence is trying to be separated from us so that we do not know what happened. These machines capture images of the ballots. Those ballots, in fact, are tied down per precinct. The ballot design comes from the vendor itself, and they have to be specific with these updates to know, for example, if you move one precinct over, you might be voting for a different city council member. So there's a way to audit whether ballots were counted right within the precinct. And if you're going to infuse hundreds of thousands of ballots quickly, you might not be able to make sure that the right machine involved in the right count could count those ballots. Separating the chain of custody makes it extraordinarily more difficult. Another thing that you could do is not vote down ticket, so that that information doesn't cause a red flag. Moreover, on these ballots and in this process, there are barcodes that give us an awful lot of information that help us audit this process if we have access to the ballots themselves, which no one has been allowed to have access to. So now we got drop boxes, we got a break in the chain of custody, we got all this alteration of election procedures, we've got different laws being applied in different ways in the same state, and we have the consolidation of counting centers. But if you're going to make an impact in an election, you have to be able to control the vote of a certain number of people. So you can't just intercept and guess whether it's a Republican vote or a Democrat vote on the ballot. It doesn't make sense to just take a guess at a drop box and say that looks Republican, that looks Democrat. You can do some of that by the precinct and by the identification of the voter history in that area, but that is extraordinarily difficult to pull off. So how do you inject fraudulent ballots into the stream to be counted? Well, there are a couple of things, and I'm not saying that this is the path, but this reality, this truth demands questions and demands hard answers and hard evidence. We have had an unprecedented first-time partnership between blue state officials and private parties to share access to sensitive government information. I'll give you one example. I'll give you more than one, I'm sorry. Michigan. There is a company called NGP Van that is a tech firm that is left-leaning, that consolidates data, monetizes information, and helps Democrat candidates. They're also a fundraising arm for leftist causes. That's their job. That's how they make money. There's communication between Governor Whitmer, her political director, and the state health director in Michigan, where they are negotiating how to give NGP Van the contract for COVID tracing without anyone knowing of it. It was suggested that NGP Van create a subsidiary called Michigan Van, and that Michigan Van become a subcontractor for the general contractor on COVID tracing. I believe you all know all of the sensitive information that will be required by law to be turned over to COVID tracers if they knock on your door and hear that you were exposed to COVID. That's the type of data mining that people have made billions of dollars on. Once the whistle was blown on the negotiation of that contract, the governor disclaimed any knowledge of it, ordered her health officials to renege on the contract, and backed out of it. But there's more. The Secretary of State of Michigan and in Pennsylvania each engaged Rock the Vote to give them a front-side portal into the qualified voter files. You see, previously, if the League of Women Voters was conducting a voter registration drive, you would fill out a piece of paper. They would take that paper to the county clerk, election clerk, and only the clerk could enter that information into the qualified voter files. That's important for three primary reasons. The clerk is defined by geography. They only enter registrants relating to their county. That gives an accountability to them. They are subject to Freedom of Information Act requests and demands for information, so you can hold them accountable if they enter fraudulent names. They also have political accountability. They are voted out of office if they fail. Rock the Vote has none of those checks upon them. These third parties don't have those checks upon them. Now, I will tell you, and you don't have to speak to many people, you know identity theft is a big issue in America. It's a big issue around the world. There are groups, and they don't have to have extraordinary talent, that can obtain personal information about you very easily. There's actually groups that consolidate data and sell them, like the National Change of Address reports, like reports regarding deaths, marriages, changes of name. All of those things are data that you can get and crunch. I could get your Social Security number with a little bit of work, not too much. So I'm not saying Rock the Vote did anything nefarious. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that we have opened up a vulnerability on the front end of our voter rolls intentionally through these contracts. It would be very easy for a volunteer to suddenly create voters that weren't otherwise there. I'll give you an example. One of my colleagues at Liberty University School of Law, where I teach, a former acting dean, Rena Linda Volson. I've got Rena's affidavit here. She was born in Michigan as Annie Billis, B-I-L-A-S. She never registered to vote under that name. Her parents always called her Rena. As she grew up and she reached the age of majority, she changed her name. And by the way, changes of name and those lists are also available. She legally changed her name to Rena. So she was Rena Billis. Then she voted for Michael Dukakis. Not as Rena Billis, it might be after she was married, but she voted for Dukakis in 1994. She was a little bit hesitant for me to say that because she knows my history as a Republican. But she voted for Michael Dukakis. Then she moved out of Michigan. She got married, and now her name is Rena Linda Volson. And she hasn't been called Annie Billis since she was 18, and she never registered under that name. With all this talk of fraud, now what are the odds that Rena Linda Volson would go back and check at her Michigan registration when she's living in Virginia to see if she was registered under a name she never registered? You see, you can look at all these voting histories and you can tell who never votes. You can determine who's not going to check their voting history. You can also obtain names that center around their identity but are actually false. She was registered in Michigan as Annie Billis. Somebody did that, not her. And the question is why? Well, I believe we're starting to get an understanding of the why. There was a front door portal that was opened up to our voting rolls that had not been opened in this way before. Those are serious questions to ask those persons who opened up those portals. We have demanded and demanded and demanded the contracts. We had 10 FOIA requests. We're denied each one, and we just got them. And in our analysis, they pose significant problems for the operation of elections. Now, they will tell you, I assure you, that everything's fine. There's no fraud going on. That is an actual quote of an election official in Delaware County to Gregory Stenstrom when he was trying to get in the room that he had the right to get into, and he saw people moving around. It was mail crates of ballots. Mail crates. And they said, I assure you, everything's fine. There's no fraud going on. At some point, that answer does not hold. At some point, it doesn't hold. So one of the important things I want to mention and highlight about Gregory's statement is he saw those mail bins. I don't know if you know what I'm speaking about. We've got pictures of them somewhere up here, don't we, Peter? The actual mail bins of the bulk mail. Thank you. This is going to tie to Jesse Morgan's story. Not that, I'm sorry. We'll get to that. Do we have the picture of the bulk mail plastic bins? I thought I saw it. We'll find it for you. You might have seen it. I don't know if any of you have done bulk mail, but there's these heavy plastic bins, and you insert the bulk mail vertically, and you generally organize it by zip code to make it efficient. And Greg saw many of those being brought in to that counting center in Delaware County. That type of bulk mail. Here it is. These plastic bins right here. They're in different sizes, but Greg, you saw these types of bins in the Delaware Counting Center. And that's important when we get to Jesse Morgan's story here in a minute. So you have to control some of the ballots. We've shown how perhaps you can create persons like that and cast ballots on their behalf. And I would encourage you, again, to look at our lawsuits. You will see that there are ballots being cast for persons that didn't cast them. I'm looking right now. It's right there on the bottom, 29,000 in Georgia. It's right here. Yeah, I got it. No, I'm sorry, it's 15,331. Ballots that were not requested that were cast. Right there. And that's in one category that we're seeing that. So we know ballots that weren't requested were cast. We know there are ways to create identities to cast those ballots, and we have sworn statements supporting that. So now how do you enter these ballots into the counting stream? How do you infuse tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of ballots into the counting stream? Well, we have with us Ethan Pease. Ethan was a subcontractor for a postal a company that delivered mail in Madison, Wisconsin. And he's going to tell you his story about backmarking ballots in the post office. Now, I want to say this. You've heard this pop up elsewhere. Traverse City, Michigan. Whistleblower steps forward and said the postmaster ordered him to backdate ballots. You all know about the gentleman in Erie, Pennsylvania that they claim recanted, but then he said, I never recanted. He overheard it. There's also Elkins Park, Pennsylvania, in which a gentleman was told that he must throw away or put in the bulk undeliverable mail all Trump mail and deliver Biden mail. There's a lot of whistleblowers in the United States Postal Service that give cause for concern. And Ethan has come forward and is going to share his story about concerns in Madison, Wisconsin.
Thank you, Phil. During the run-up to and on Election Day, I was working as a temporary hire at United Mailing Services, UMS, a USPS subcontractor in Wisconsin. I began employment on August 26, 2020 as a route driver and box truck driver. This meant my job was to pick up mail on a predetermined route and deliver it to UMS for sorting and metering. I would then take the sorted mail in my box truck to USPS. In September or October, I began to deliver mail and ballots from UMS to USPS as part of my evening delivery duties. I knew this because there was special bins marked for ballots only. On one occasion, I forgot to retrieve the ballots for transportation and had to go back for them. After that, I always made sure to check that I had the ballot bins loaded for transport. On November 2nd, 2020, I noticed that there was only one ballot in the bin for delivery to USPS. And on November 3rd, Election Day, there were no ballots in the bin for delivery. One can imagine my surprise then when the next day, November 4th, I was asked by a senior USPS employee named Monte if I had forgotten any ballots the night before. Monte explained that an order came down from the Wisconsin-Illinois chapter of USPS that 100,000 ballots were missing. Monte then told me that his post office had dispatched employees to look for the missing ballots around 4 a.m., and that only 7 or 8 were found at UMS. Based on my previous experience and habit of double-checking for ballots, I believe that to be a lie. The following day, November 5th, 2020, I had a conversation with a different USPS employee named Rachel, in which she admitted that USPS employees were ordered to backdate ballots that were received too late to be lawfully counted. I asked Rachel if I would get in trouble with my boss for those ballots the other night, referring to the allegedly missing ballots I discussed with USPS employee Monte on November 4th, 2020. No, you wouldn't, she responded, as long as they were postmarked for the 3rd. She continued, that's why they had us do that. I didn't bring any of this to the attention of my supervisors at USPS at the time due to what I perceived to be their hostility towards President Donald Trump and their evident contempt for the law. I heard those same two post office employees making jokes about taking mail-in ballots for Trump and throwing them away. I'm not a Trump supporter. I'm not a Biden supporter either. In fact, I didn't vote for either of the main candidates. But something profoundly wrong occurred in Wisconsin during the presidential election, and the American people have a right to know about it. Thank you.
Now, you probably caught that, but it is significant that Ethan firmly believes that he did deliver all ballots and that falsely postal workers claimed at a time when they were told to round up 100,000 ballots, found ballots within the stream of mail that he was responsible for. So perhaps Ethan missed those 8 or so ballots. Or perhaps there's an intentional insertion of fraudulent ballots that were completed by others into the stream of mail for ballots to be counted. Either way, these ballots were illegitimate in that they should have been postmarked November 4th rather than November 3rd. Now, falsely postmarking the mail is a crime. People don't do crimes idly. They do it for a reason. What could be the reason? Now, I want to turn now to Jesse Morgan, and I want to set the scene a little bit and explain to you my initial interview with him, in which Colonel Schaefer accompanied me. Jesse runs a mail route for his employer, 10 Roads Express. And from the end of September through October 21st, when this incident occurred, it was pretty routine. The post office likes routine. I mean, that's efficient. People show up at a certain time, they arrive, they dock, they unload, they load, they get to the next station at a specific time. And the post office keeps track of this all of the time. Jesse, I'll ask him to describe, because I might not describe it fully or correctly, but when he backs up to a dock, for example, for his trailer to be unloaded, well, let me back up. As he first pulls into some postal facilities, he shows his identity. It's a badge. And he receives a slip wherever he goes that identifies who he is and basically indicates what's on that truck, what's part of the load, that he's been there. He backs up to the dock, and an expediter will come out, and they will use a scanner, and they scan. I'm going to forget all the things they scan. There's a dock scan, right? There's a dock scan, and he's going to do this much better than I am. I'm sorry, buddy. And then they also are going to scan a metal seal that is put on the back of that trailer that can't be opened unless you tear the seal. So they know nobody has been in to steal from that load or alter that load. It has a barcode on it. They will scan that. And then each of the pallets sometimes has data that they scan. So they're keeping track of all of this. Moreover, Jesse's driving a truck that has GPS that he can only drive when he signs in on an electronic board that keeps track of wherever he goes. There's also identification on the trailer, so that they can specifically identify the trailer. Now, Jesse, during this time, by the way, that he's running this route we're going to be speaking about, is using the same trailer. You love that trailer, right? It was a good trailer. It was a good trailer. It had suspension, right? He describes it better than I, but it kept good traction on the road. You can handle in water. It had some kind of lift on it. I don't understand. I have trouble changing the oil. I'm sorry, Jesse. I'm bad at this. He loved that trailer. It worked for him. He'd driven other trailers, and they were worse trailers than that one. So he had trailer 10R1440 all the time on that route. Now, Jesse would roll out of bed. He'd go and pick up his tractor, which was parked in the Auto One parking lot, which is a car dealership there in Lancaster. He'd do all of his checks. He'd get in his truck. He'd sign in, and then he'd roll over to the Lancaster post office, where he'd back up to pretty much the same dock, maybe another dock, and they would load him up. Or did they already have you loaded? They loaded you? already loaded or in process. He'd hook up his tractor. They'd get done with it. He'd check his load because one time he didn't and it shifted and he jackknifed on the road. It was a scary, scary event. And so he always checked his load. He'd walk in there, make sure it's balanced. They'd shut it. They'd slap on the seal. They'd do all their scanning, and Jesse's on the road from Lancaster, Pennsylvania to Bethpage, New York. And he loved driving into New York, especially that time of day, early morning hours. He'd leave. He'd roll out about 1 a.m. You'd get up to Bethpage 4 or so, 4:15, 4:20. Beautiful, seeing the city without all the traffic. He'd pull into Bethpage, back up to the same dock. The expediters are there. They'd have some small chat, but really weren't friends. Jesse stayed on his job. He was polite. Jesse, not political. He'll tell you, he didn't vote for either one. Doesn't follow the news much. So he's up there, and they're loading up these ballots. He didn't even notice this time on October 21st. He didn't notice at first that it was ballots, didn't think much of it. And he'll tell you about that, and then I'll come back to that. But his route's always the same. Then he gets loaded up, and he comes back to Harrisburg. Now, I want to explain something to you. Where's that? And you guys will understand this. This is not his truck. But generally, he's hauling from Bethpage what will go to Lancaster and Harrisburg. But his route takes him to Harrisburg first, which means you have to load Lancaster up there in the back of the trailer, the nose of the trailer. Yeah. They would load Lancaster first and then Harrisburg. So when he arrived in Harrisburg, Harrisburg could be taken off and the Lancaster load was there. And then he would drive to Lancaster. You can imagine the confusion and the delay that would be caused if Jesse decided he wasn't going to Harrisburg first, but he went to Lancaster. Then they would have to take off the Harrisburg load, then get the Lancaster load, then reload Harrisburg to have him drive to Harrisburg. So the post office has got this down. Despite all the complaints, they have all the loading and the logistics and the systems to run efficiently. So his typical day is that he goes down from Bethpage to Harrisburg, he unloads, pulls up to the dock, they unload, and then he's off to Lancaster, he unloads, he unhooks his trailer, he leaves his trailer there, he's going to pick it up the next day, drives back to Auto One, and then gets back home. Same way every time till October 21st. Now I want to share with you the first time I met Jesse. I went up to his home. I'd heard about his story, and Colonel Schaefer was with me. And I did what might be considered a forensic interview. It's conducted in such a way to assess the veracity of the person that you're speaking with. And generally what you do is you begin with questions that set the scene in which the witness has confidence, so that they gain their confidence. You let them know they're in control. They can stop the conversation anytime that they want. They can kick me out of the house. We had a video camera. He could stop the video. He could refuse to answer any question. He could ask me any question that he wanted. So I had Jesse set the scene. During the scene setting, he mentioned something to me. It was an offhand comment. He was telling me about his jobs, and he said, and there was a time there that I had some difficulty. And then he went on setting the scene. I knew what he was referring to, but he did not know what I knew. Jesse did not know what I knew about his background. So I let him continue setting the scene, and then I had him describe what happened. And all of it, by the way, is credible and matches up with the tangible evidence, how the post office works, and so forth. And so, as he was going through, and when he was getting done with telling me what happened, I said, Jesse, why don't you tell me about that little difficulty that you had? And he said, what do you mean? I said, about your past. He said, what do you want to know? I said, the truth. And Jesse revealed to me that he had been a drug addict, that he'd been arrested, that he served some time, that for a while in his life he wanted to do things his way, that he violated probation, that he went back up, and that when he saw his first daughter born, he decided to turn around his life. And he's been sober since then. I said, you know this is going to come down on your head. If you step forward, this is going to come down on your head. There will be people who aren't concerned about what you saw. They will be more concerned about trying to destroy you because they don't like what you saw. And I asked him if he had told his 3 daughters that their father had been in prison. And he said he hadn't. They didn't know. Now they will. Now they will. This man is telling the truth. You can confirm the truth. We have a responsibility to get to the answers of the questions raised by what he saw. And if this nation continues in destroying individuals rather than listening to what they have to say, I don't know if we can make ourselves out of this wilderness that we've created. I truly ask you to listen to what this man says, because he is a truth teller. Jesse?
Thanks, Phil. Tell you what, first time I met him, I was like, this dude's pretty cool. And then afterwards, I was like, this dude's an asshole. I want to tell you how I see it, and I'm a pretty straight shooter, all right? I'm sorry if I swore. I don't know if I'm allowed to or not, but I'm a truck driver, so be prepared, all right? Hey, got me reading papers, and I don't like reading, I'll be honest with you, okay? I didn't want to come. I'll tell you what, I have everything to lose and nothing to gain from this, all right? Everything to lose, nothing to gain. And I'm already losing. Okay? So for me to come here, it was a big step. And for me to come here, it was just more so I had to put myself to the side and I have to worry about everyone else. Because I believe everyone else in America should know, all right? Just a little past, he kind of gave you a little rundown. I served some time, had some charges. You guys want to run with it, you can run with it. But this is what the real story is. The story is what we're here for today, all right? I didn't want this put on me, but for some reason, it's on me, and here I am, all right? I drive tractor trailer for U.S. Postal Service, subcontractor. I drive a route transporting mail from Lancaster, Pennsylvania to Bethpage, New York to Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, and back to Lancaster. On October 21st, when I arrived for my usual route in Bethpage, New York, an expediter made 3 references to ballots that were to be loaded into my trailer, including saying, hey, you've got a ballot today, or you have ballots today, and even showing me a piece of registered mail and saying someone really wanted their ballot to count. In total, I saw 24 Gaylords. Where's that box? Right here. You got this guy right here. That's kind of a good representation of a Gaylord, all right? They're not usually put together with duct tape, though. Here you go. This is pretty good, too. But for a visual, I mean, that will work, all right? So in total, I saw 24 Gaylords, or large cardboard containers of ballots loaded into my trailer. These Gaylords contain plastic trays, I call them totes, but trays will work, of ballots stacked on top of each other. All the envelopes were the same size. I could see the envelopes had handwritten addresses, return addresses, and I could even tell that one was marked registered mail. That one was off to the side, all right? They were complete ballots. I didn't think much of it at the time. At Bethpage, I was first loaded with 2 tall Gaylords. So picture that thing there, or this little representation here, but this tall, all right? So I was loaded with 2 tall Gaylords, okay? And that were, hold on, where was I at? That had mixed mail pieces bound for Lancaster. These Gaylords were loaded first because they would be the last off my trailer. The remainder of the truck was loaded with complete ballots bounded for Harrisburg. I then drove to Harrisburg with the ballots. Usually I offload in one of the 7 docks every day, but not on October 21st. I wasn't allowed to offload. That's different. Whenever I pull into Harrisburg, I go around and I get my dock and I get unloaded and then I roll out. Not that day, all right? Not that day. Instead, I was made to wait for roughly 6 hours in the yard, from 9:15 a.m. till 3 p.m. This really ticked me off, all right? Because my brother was in town. He just moved back up, and I wanted to spend some time with him. I tried to get the attention of postal workers, but no one would tell me what's going on. All of this was weird. I arrived at about the same time every day. The expediter scans all my seals and barcodes, and they unload me. But for the first time, but from the time I first arrived in Harrisburg from Bethpage, everything got weird. None of that happened. After waiting 6 hours, I went inside to figure out what's going on. I was told to wait for the transportation supervisor. This was also weird. 16 months I've been doing this. I haven't ever talked to the transportation supervisor for United States Postal Service. I talk to an expediter. I come in, I see an expediter, that's who I deal with. If I have an issue, it's the expediter. I don't deal with anyone else but the expediter. I never talk to the United States Postal Service's transportation supervisor. Let's make that clear. I have my own transportation supervisor for the company that I work for. He's the one that gives me the details. He's the one that I listen to. I don't listen to this guy. He's the guy that would contact my boss if he needs something ran different. I've never spoken with this transportation supervisor from the United States Postal Service. They don't speak to people like me. He's a top guy. He's the kind of guy that would speak to my boss, not a trucker like me. The supervisor told me to drive to Lancaster without being unloaded in Harrisburg. This made no sense to me. I knew the ballots were loaded for Harrisburg, and that if I was to go to Lancaster, they would have to off-unload my those pallets in Lancaster to take off Lancaster stuff, to put the ballots back on the trailer, to send it back to Harrisburg. Doesn't make no sense. This was a real screw up in my thinking. I wanted my ticket. So whenever I go to a place, when I go there and whenever I'll leave, I'll get a ticket. I'll get a ticket, a slip, whatever you want to call it. It's the date, time that I'm supposed to be there. It'll have my trailer number on it. It'll have how much I'm loaded. It'll have the seal number. It has my name. It'll have who was the expediter. So I wanted my ticket, my slip. I call them tickets. Some people call them slips, okay? And then because I was there for 6 hours, I wanted my late slip too, because I wanted to be paid for sitting in that yard for 6 hours. So I wanted the ticket and the late slip for stopping in at Harrisburg. Also, I wanted it because if they tell me to take this load to Lancaster, I don't want to pull up the Lancaster of Harrisburg crap and be like, yeah, they just told me to come here and not have no ticket, because they don't look like I just came straight here, you know? Just to prove that I was there. And so others would know I wasn't the person that screwed this up. A ticket is always provided to a driver when they arrive at a United States Postal Service facility. It proves you were there. The transportation supervisor refused to give me a ticket and told me to leave. I then demanded he give me a late slip, since I wanted to get paid for the time I was sitting there. And waiting for them to offload me, he refused to give me that too. He was kind of rude and wouldn't explain anything to me. He just told me to go to Lancaster. I then drove to Lancaster, unhooked my trailer in its normal place, and then drove my truck to where I always park it in a nearby lot, and then I went home. The next day, it just got weirder. As I arrived at Lancaster's United States Postal Service facility with my tractor, I went to hook up to my trailer, and my trailer was gone. Not there no more. 10R 1440. Since I started driving that Bethpage route, I've always had trailer 10R 1440. I like that trailer. It was a nice trailer. I know you guys probably don't really know nothing about truck driving or trailers or anything, but the rear tandems, I had if you're driving light, the rear tandems the front axle will actually go up. Nice air ride. The doors on it worked great. Some of the trailers that place has, you could honestly put it on the back of a carrier and drop it off in the middle of the ocean and no one would worry about it. So that trailer I really liked, okay? What happened on October 21st was a series of unusual events that cannot be a coincidence. I know I saw ballots with return addresses filled out, thousands of them, thousands. Loaded onto my trailer in New York and headed for Pennsylvania. At first, I didn't think it was a big deal. In fact, I thought it was really awesome. I really did. I was like, sweet, I'm doing something for the presidential race. You know, this is cool. But as things became weirder, I got to thinking and wondered why I was driving complete ballots from New York to Pennsylvania. I didn't know why, so I decided to speak up. And that's what I'm doing today. Thank you.
Thank you, Jesse. Colonel Schaefer is going to demonstrate how we made an estimate of the number of ballots that Jesse had in his load on that occasion. And I want to remind you, we've received corroboration not from Jesse, but from others, that this happened multiple times from that particular facility. Colonel?
Attorney General Klein, thank you for the honor of leading this investigative team. And as we speak, we have members of our team in the field continuing operations. Jesse has been put through the ringer. We have been intaking a lot of whistleblowers. They are brave people who seek nothing but to provide you the truth, and that's what we're all seeking here. So again, I'm grateful to Attorney General Klein for the benefit and privilege of doing this, and I think that's what we're all trying to do here today, is get to the truth. I'm going to outline some of the issues which makes Jesse's story so peculiar and so troubling regarding what we now know to be fact. Jesse's one of those unsung, invisible heroes who works in the dead of the night that makes our lives better. As he said, he has nothing to gain here, but everything to lose. And that's why it's important that we listen to him. So the first question we should all ask is, where's Jesse's trailer? Where is it? Where'd it go? What was the route it took after it left? I think it's a reasonable question, one that I think any reasonable American who's curious about 24 pallets of ballots, where they went. So we have a number of teams supporting the Amistad effort. One of them is my own London Center intelligence team. They did the estimate of ballots. So just so you all understand what we're talking about, depending on the density, depending on the trays, and again, this leads back to Greg's story, seeing these ballots showing up in the counting rooms in the middle of the night. That's the pointy end of the spear. We trace it back through all the different machinations to Jesse, to his mass transportation of these things. And I can tell you, other investigations that are now ongoing with our field elements are developing the next set of leads. It doesn't stop at Bethpage. It only begins there. And as Phil said, all investigations start with questions. We have additional questions we're now going to answer. But to the point of this, 24 Gaylords full of these things, not mailed like they normally would be. And let me make this very clear. The Bethpage Center is not a place where you can frank or process mail. It's a bulk mail center. As a matter of fact, it's called a process and distribution center. That means big boxes and big things go through. You don't take in envelopes. You don't take in little pieces of mail and put them into big bundles. These things were bundled. They were on trays. They were processed. They were curated, if you will. These were ready to be counted. That's what makes this so important. So depending on the density of these things, it could be 144 to over to 250,000 ballots. Let me tell you a little secret. Part of our developing investigation indicates that Jesse wasn't alone. There was a number, as in like a bunch of different trucks, which engaged in this. So when you think about the magnitude of potential votes showing up the night of the election after midnight, you have to have an artifact. So if you eliminate the impossible, with all things being equal, whatever remains must be the truth. The truth is, ballots showed up. They were counted. They do not match necessarily the records of who should have voted. In some instances, the stats don't add up. And we continue to analyze that. But with that said, I believe, beyond a shadow of a doubt, we have evidence of a massive transfer of completed, curated ballots ready to be injected into counting centers. Thank you. And we'll be continuing to take in, we'll provide information later regarding where you can email leads to as well. We'll put that later.
Get to that.
Yeah.
Okay, we have a few more things, and then we'll get to questions and also mailing in leads. Thank you, Colonel. I wanted to relate to you one of the things we did to double-check Jesse's story. We called in what we call a red team, which are postal experts from around the nation. We didn't tell them Jesse's story. We put them in a room, and we said, create a schematic of the flow of mail in the United States Postal Service so that we can know where you might fraudulently infuse mail into the stream. So they worked all day. They created a schematic. They put it up on a room. It's still in one of the rooms over here. And then we stepped forward and we told Jesse's story, and it matched up perfectly on how you would insert fraudulent mail into the stream. We then asked these postal workers, and I think you can, we asked them to identify all the anomalies. What is different from the normal day that Jesse experienced? What processes changed on this day that were similar on every other day? And it reminds me of a case. I did a murder case in 2007 of a man that I had alleged that he kidnapped a 13-year-old girl and murdered her in 1974, I think it was. And back in that day, in 1974, this man was working alone as a custodian at a high school. And we were able to identify by other witnesses and by putting together pieces that for the last minute and a half of the last time she was seen alive, for a minute and a half, he was alone in that parking lot outside that high school with her before nobody saw her again. And when you look at the investigative material at the time, what you saw is that the FBI or law enforcement, his local law enforcement, went over to his home afterwards to question him back in 1974. And they opened up the trunk of his car, and in it, they found some things. They found a butcher knife. Well, he explained that his wife needed new cutlery, and he went shopping for it. They found twine that you could use to bind a person. And he said, well, you know, sometimes you need twine. I keep it in the trunk for convenience. Okay. They found a canvas bag. That canvas bag was big enough in which you could put a body in, and it was a canvas bag that those janitors wheel around at the high school that they put the trash bags in. And he said, well, my trash bags are kind of weak. I just wanted to have it. Okay. They found hydrochloric acid. He said, well, you know, I'm doing an experiment. I want to clean my driveway, and his driveway was gravel. And then he said, we found this chloroform, 18 drops of which could kill a person, less than that would incapacitate a person, especially a 13-year-old girl. And he said, well, I wanted to get high with it. And then there was a pillow, which he said was his niece's, and there was a blonde hair, and the victim was blonde. He's serving life in prison. He had an explanation for each piece of that evidence. But when you add up all of his independent causes of that evidence, the odds that this janitor would coincidentally have left the pillow of his niece in his car the day he bought cutlery for his wife when he was going to do an experiment on his driveway and get high and had a canvas bag for trash is unbelievable. There was one causal agent to all of that activity. He kidnapped, raped, and murdered a 13-year-old girl. Now, I say that about the power of what's called circumstantial evidence. Crimes do not occur with people watching. In fact, most people don't want to be watched when they commit a crime. And so we have to piece together circumstantial evidence. In this room, there's all kinds of DNA. I'm losing it by the minute with my hair shedding. But if you found my DNA in this room, you would know nothing about whether I was involved with a murder that occurred tonight unless you understand the circumstances. I don't like Hollywood for this, and we always warn juries about this. There are no devices that solve crimes. I can't take a device, hand it up to Jesse's mouth, and through the ambient air determine that he ate pepperoni pizza 3 weeks ago next to a woman wearing Parisian perfume and had an element of smoke in it, and the cigarettes are only sold in Paris, and you're guilty. We don't have those things. So we put together logical conclusions based on the information that we have. Anomalies. What should have happened in Harrisburg? Jesse's trailer is immediately unloaded. It was not unloaded in Harrisburg, even though his trailer contained mail for Harrisburg. Jesse should have been quickly unloaded and able to proceed. Jesse was forced to wait without explanation in a parking lot in the yard of that facility for 6 hours without explanation. Well, perhaps, maybe there was a new person operating as an expediter. Perhaps somebody was sick and somebody forgot. Perhaps. Jesse's only exchanges pleasantries and small talk with others who talk to him at U.S. postal facilities. Postal supervisors don't talk to drivers. All of our experts say that. Jesse talked to a postal supervisor. Normally, Jesse receives a ticket that proves he was there. That was refused. Now, that wasn't an accident. That was intentional. That was, no, you receive no ticket. No explanation. Jesse unloads his trailer in Harrisburg before proceeding to Lancaster. Jesse was told to go to Lancaster while carrying the Harrisburg mail. Maybe we've got somebody who doesn't know how the Postal Service works. Maybe we've got somebody who didn't communicate with the postal supervisor who gave that order. Perhaps there are independent explanations for all of these, but you can imagine the odds of all of that happening on the day he carried completed ballots across state line from New York to New Jersey, across the state line of New Jersey to Pennsylvania, where his trailer full of ballots disappeared. Jesse usually leaves his trailer at the dock in Lancaster at the end of his shift and picks it up the next day. It's gone. Where's Jesse's trailer? Only Jesse drives his truck, but there's been some indication since somebody else has operated his tractor, according to the digital logins. The odds of this having independent causal agents for each one of these anomalies is astounding. Most likely, and in fact, I would say, probable cause to believe, most certainly, that all of these were caused because they could not open up the back of that trailer and reveal its load to people who might not know about those ballots. They put the ballots on the wrong truck, and they picked the wrong man. Because here you have a man who's willing to tell the truth about what that load is. We'll entertain questions. Yes?
A.G. Barr, while we were having this event, just came out with a statement to the Associated Press and said that he's found no evidence that would swing the election in any direction. What's your response to that?
Well, I would say an investigation is needed. You know, you find evidence when you investigate.
And has the DOJ been in contact with you about any of these testimonies? Or is this the first time that these testimonies have been?
Well, as it relates to Mr. Morgan, we've been in very recent contact because we've just come into a full understanding of his story, as well as Nathan. Mr. Stenstrom has provided testimony before. We received requests from the California, from an office, a field office in California. I've reached out to United States attorneys, and we're in Pennsylvania, and we're in the process of reaching out to United States attorney in New York, and also local law enforcement as well. Yes, sir.
Yeah, so you point out 3 locations, New York, Pennsylvania, right, for these truckloads of vendors. Is there any particular pattern in these regions, any particular phase more like illegal ballot processing center? Are there other truck drivers of those?
I'll tell you what we know, and of course we're continuing to develop evidence, as Colonel Schaefer said, as we can. Of course, I don't have subpoena power. Some of our litigation, we can search for it in discovery, what's called discovery. But we would encourage law enforcement to become involved. What we know now is that Mr. Morgan transported these ballots that were completed across state lines, and we received cooperation from others that occurred on October 21st, and from another source that this happened multiple times from that specific facility in Bethpage, which, as Colonel Schaefer mentioned, and as Mr. Morgan mentioned, cannot process mail. These bulk mail ballots should never have been there or received there. In fact, we're aware of complaints that were issued because of that. Yes.
Do you have any evidence that these ballots?
Oh, repeat the question? Yeah, thank you.
Do you have any evidence that these ballots came from outside the United States? And if so, do you have any indication of where they might have originated?
Do I have any evidence that these ballots came from outside the United States, and do I have any evidence of where they originated? Not at this time, but I will tell you that experts and experts that we're working with say we can easily determine that if we get access to the ballots. You know, there's the type of paper that's used, there's the type of markings on the ballots. You can tell whether the ballot was cast by a machine or by human hand. There's all kinds of ways, if we gain access to these ballots, that we can pull information to either validate the election count or invalidate the election count. So again, this is another example of why don't we have access to those ballots for that type of analysis? It can be done by experts, and we've been asking for that, and we will continue legally to try to seek that. But excellent question. You don't know until you get that ballot under analysis. Yes, ma'am.
So if we're talking about hundreds of thousands of ballots that came from New York, are you alleging that they were filled out in New York and then counted fraudulently in Pennsylvania? And if so, who are you alleging created or filled out those ballots in New York?
Okay. The question is, are we alleging that the ballots were what? I'm sorry. Who do we allege completed the ballots, and where do we believe that they were completed and filled out? We are with what Jesse saw, and now we're asking those questions, and we're investigating to find those answers. We have some leads, but I'm not ready to share that at this time. I can tell you, as you have probably inferred, that this evidence that a person transported completed ballots that were already ready for counting and put in these bulk mail trays from New York to Pennsylvania, and that Mr. Stenstrom on election night saw those very same types of trays bringing in ballots late or early in the morning on November 4th, raises serious, serious concerns. We do not know, but we intend to find out. Yes, ma'am.
I have another question. You mentioned at the beginning, thank you. You mentioned at the beginning that that the whistleblowers here were taking great chances. Jesse even mentioned that, you know, he may lose his job. You also
He shouldn't, by the way.
He should not.
He should not.
You exhorted the media to look at the story and not into his past, given the history that we have with the legacy media in this country and abroad. I'm almost certain that Jesse's entire history is all over the internet by now. So what, this is obviously a deterrent to whistleblowers who may be tempted to come forward. What do you have to say to the media about that? But also, what do you say to potential whistleblowers? How are they protected? What is in place for them to be sure that they can come forward safely and tell their story? We've seen two people here today who are nonpartisan, who want the truth to get out. What can we guarantee to any individual in the United States of America who wants to tell their story? How can we keep them safe? We know of at least one witness who has come forward with Sidney Powell. That person is in the hospital with injuries because they told the truth.
Well, there are no guarantees. There are no guarantees unless we have a culture that is respectful of the value of each and every single individual and believes that each and every individual in this nation has a right to speak about what they saw and speak about what the truth is. And that requires a rejection of identity politics. It requires an elimination of the toxicity of our national dialogue. In short, it requires maturity that we have not shown in some time. I do believe most people know the path to that proper conduct and that respect. I believe that. I think people are fearful to take that path for whatever reason, a desire to be first or a desire to appease somebody whose opinion they believe they need to appease, or fear of a result. Either way, it makes no difference. We need to start changing things. I would encourage anybody out there who is concerned about whistleblowers. Now, I didn't promise Nathan or Jesse anything. That was important because I knew that if I did, you would ask, and then you would assign a motivation to them for coming forward that was not present. So I was actually placed in the position of not offering anything to them, and I haven't. But I would encourage those who know about this story to do so. If either of these gentlemen lose their job, they shouldn't. In fact, if you could call their employers and tell them that they've got excellent persons working for them, that might help, I don't know. But there ought to be support for whistleblowers, and I hope that some type of action is taken, and I hope they feel free to avail themselves of that support if they suffer economic hardship. And the mob frightening and terrorizing people because they speak, we have to stand up and speak against. This doxing of people, this assault upon individuals, this identity of their children, that's not America. And I believe most Americans know that's not America. And we have to stop listening to it and reject it and collectively search for the truth. So, thank you for raising that question.
Yes, sir. One more question. This is Sean Lin from NTD.
Yeah.
So, Attorney General Barr just stated about 20 minutes ago, he said the DOJ hasn't yet to find widespread voter frauds that could have changed 2020 election. Do you have any response to that?
Not really. I mean, I don't believe that the Attorney General was familiar with this. And I don't believe that the question is, will it change the outcome of the election? I don't believe that's a valid question. You can't even answer that question until you search for the truth and launch a full investigation. I don't know how these ballots were voted. I told you, based upon the evidence that we have, how certain partisans can gain advantage to be able to infuse these ballots. But I guess the question is really this: should fraud be investigated? Not, is the fraud we're investigating sufficient to change the outcome of the election? I mean, that's kind of backwards, I believe. And honestly, I don't know why the media would ask that question. The American people have to decide, is this overwhelming evidence of fraud within the election deserving of an answer? And when we get the answers, we'll come to know whether it would have affected the outcome. Yeah.
Question for Nathan. So you're testifying that there was 100,000 ballots.
We are, I'm sorry, we're keeping their statements, we're providing their statements to law enforcement, and this stuff is under investigation, so they're not responding to questions at this time.
Okay.
I will answer questions if I can.
So his statement is that there were over 100,000 ballots on the morning of November 4th to backdate. Are there any other witnesses to corroborate this, to your knowledge?
Well, the witnesses would be who he spoke with at the Postal Service.
Okay.
So he was told on two different occasions by two separate persons the same thing when they weren't in the room together. And so one corroborated the other by saying the same thing. That's corroboration. But also,
Are there other statements from those individuals?
I don't have statements from those individuals, no. Not at this time. Any other questions? All right, we thank you for your attendance.